Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Unit 3 of the course. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the first lab you're going to do in this unit, which involves a test rather than a survey or an experiment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what observations should you be making and how should you be compiling those observations in order to show that information in an effective way. And I think really what I want to get at is, how do you get a level 4? Because a lot of people have been scoring level 3s consistently on these labs, but I want to make sure that you all know what I'm expecting when it comes to getting a 4. So what I want to do now is, I've actually gone ahead and I've run this experiment. I'm in the middle of running it. Actually, I haven't run the whole thing. I'm in the middle of running it, and I want to show you the way that it looks from my end, and I want to talk a little bit about the way that I would interpret the results of this test. So as you can see, I've had a variety of people do my quiz so far. I've got 10 results here, and my hypothesis, personally, what I sort of thought that I would see is, I would see that among young people, what I was hoping to see is that the glass ceiling is less of a factor, because younger people have grown up at a time where I'm hoping a stronger message of equality has been sort of like sent in schools. The idea that being a female shouldn't hold you back from having jobs, and careers that will make you, stereotypically successful. If we equate being successful with the amount of money that you earn, which there's other things that would make you successful, but I'm not a careers teacher today. I'm a psychology, sociology, and anthropology teacher, so I'm going to have to use a simple measurement and say that money equals success. What I was hoping to see is that among younger people, there's less of a glass ceiling in the way they see the world, and so far that's what I've found out. This person, they scored, they chose 3 males. Everybody else here chose only 1 or 2. And so based on the scale that I developed, we would say a person who scored 1 or 2 males, they definitely don't have a glass ceiling in the way that they view the world. Their outlook hasn't been influenced by it. This would be like a maybe, but I mean, as a scientist, how do you interpret 3 out of 5? Do you interpret that as being, well, 60% of the time they would choose a male? Or would you say that, it's pretty much like half and half? It's just that the test was designed with an odd number involved. So this one would be sort of, it's a maybe. But this one is interesting. So here's a person who picked out 4 males and only 1 female. And this is a female, and it's actually an adult who did this test. So far in my, what I would observe as a scientist is that out of all of the people who've taken the test, the only person who seems to have a glass ceiling in their outlook on life, their perception of people, is an adult, which is kind of interesting. Another interesting observation I'm going to make, now remember, as scientists, you want to try to account for your results. You want to look for instances of bias or anything that might throw off the reliability or validity of your results. And I've actually noticed something with me. This individual consistently, now this person only chose them as a maybe, but they consistently get chosen as a yes among everybody who does not have a glass ceiling in the way that they view the world. And it's I don't know, it's a really interesting observation to make, that there's something about this person, and I mean, judge for yourself. I have my suspicions as to why she's being chosen. I've talked to a few people about their choices, and they've given me some consistent data as to why that person is chosen, like why they decided that person looks successful. But I'm going to leave it, I don't want to bias your results by telling you too much about my results. All I wanted to do is I wanted to show you the way that you would administer this test, and then the idea is you then take your results and you try to compile them in such a way that they make sense. So what I have here on my chalkboard is some different ways that I can interpret my data. So this is what I would kind of be expecting from a level 3 student for this particular experiment would be to find out how many people have a glass ceiling affecting their perception and to report on that. So that's what I have going on here, the GC versus the no GC. I see that there's 1 female and 0 males who have a glass ceiling influencing their perception. But that's not the only observation that I could make. I could also take into account the ages of the people who I had do the quiz. And when I do this, I noticed something that's kind of interesting. Before, when it was only based on males and females, I really didn't see any significant results, right? But when I look based on age, what I see is that, yeah, teens still don't have a glass ceiling affecting their perception, but I see that 33% of the adults that I've interviewed do. And that's kind of a significant number. Like 1 out of 3 is, you know, it's a minority, but it's a large minority. Okay, so that shows you the importance of thinking of, you know, how can I compile my data? When I have my test results, like back from over here, when I get this information in, it's now up to me as scientist to figure out, you know, how do I make sense out of this information? Well, there are different ways that you can do that. And then there's other things that you can do with the data as well if you're creative. So one thing that I thought might be interesting would be if I want to think about, you know, is there any way that my data could be biased? You know, I want to look carefully. I want to make some observations about that too. So I thought what I'll do is I'll look and see who's getting picked the most often. And what I found is that there's 3 males, and if I labeled my people here, I find that there's 3 males that get picked more than anybody else. Male number 4, male number 5, and male number 7 are getting picked more than the other males do. And out of the females, female number 3, female number, oh sorry, it wasn't number 3, it was female number 2. That's a mistake for me. Female number 2, female number 9, and female number 11, who I've already talked about. And so as social scientists, I've made this observation too, that there's certain people who are getting picked over and over again, and then in my conclusions part, I might want to talk about why and how that might be influencing my overall results. So remember, we're in Unit 3 now, and the labs are getting a little bit more sophisticated, or at least that's what I'm shooting for, is that the labs and then your work on the labs is going to get more sophisticated. And so what I'm really looking for in this unit is, are you able to, when you're done the lab, are you able to address the idea of bias and reliability and validity in your results? Can you talk about those in your conclusion? Can you also keep those in mind when you're conducting the experiment to do what you can to minimize the results of bias and to maximize the reliability and validity of your work? But at the same time, can you own up to any problems that there might be with your research? So hopefully, as you can see, it's important to think carefully about your results when you're making observations, because at first glance, you may miss things that you would otherwise catch if you thought carefully. And then the other thing is, as a social scientist, you're always kind of open to continuing your research or going into like new directions. So maybe you started out thinking that the glass ceiling was something that it influenced a certain gender more than the other, but now what you found out is it has to do with age. And so you would maybe do some more research. You would target different age groups instead of genders, and you would maybe make a new test, a more comprehensive test with a wider variety of people in it, or maybe like different parts of the test, so that you could get even more data and test your hypothesis out to see, you know, really what is going on here, Why is it that the glass ceiling seems to influence some people but not others? Does it have to do with age? And if it does have to do with age, then the sociologist and the anthropologist would then jump in and say, well, what was going on in, say, like the 1980s and 1990s when, Generation X, which is the generation that I'm part of, my age of people who are in their 30s and 40s these days, what was going on in schools and what was going on in Canada at that time that would make them think that being male makes you more inclined to be successful? All right, so hopefully overall what you've learned today is, number one, how you would conduct this particular experiment. But number two, when it comes to conducting experiments and doing labs, the sorts of things that you should be thinking about and the sorts of things that you should be reporting on. In order to score level 4 on a lab, you have to go above and beyond what I'm expecting. And so if I'm expecting that you're going to report on the observations that you make for this particular lab, that you're going to just score, how many people perceive how many people have a glass ceiling influencing their perception versus how many are not. If you report on that, that would be, level 3, but I would need to see more than that if you're going to score a level 4. So I'd want to see that you're really putting a lot of thought into the results of your lab, and that you're noticing things, that you see trends and patterns and anomalies and things like that that come up. So the same thing goes with the conclusion. I would like to see that you're not only just telling me, to what extent is your hypothesis correct, but also other conclusions that you're making, other things that you have seen, and other factors that are influencing the results. So for me, I would look at that one person, that female number 11, who is on everybody's test page coming up as somebody who is being perceived as successful, and I would say, there's something about that picture that is drawing people to it. I'd want to find out, figure out, so what is it about that picture that is drawing people, and then how might that have influenced my results? Because I need to be nice and honest. As a social scientist, I have to be honest, and I have to admit that number one, my results are going to be biased to some extent. Number two, I'd like to know how reliable and valid my results are, and I'd like to report on that too, because it's only fair that the person reading the lab gets a clear sense and an honest sense of what the results really mean. So, with all that in mind, as you approach this lab, for those of you who are looking for level 4, think about going above and beyond. So, if I've done a level 3 job by getting 10 or 11 people to do my test, maybe a level 4 is doing twice that many. Maybe printing off 20 of these and getting 20 people to do your test. Maybe it involves dividing that up between males and females. Maybe that involves dividing it up based on age or other factors too. If you show me that there's something impressive about the way that you carry out the test and the experiment, that's how you get a level 4 for that, all right? So, for those of you who are shooting for level 4, hopefully I've helped you to get there today. For everybody else who's just happy to get a 3, good on you. Work really hard, do the lab correctly, and you'll always get a level 3.